How do you decide what progress the civilization has made? That's the most objective metric.
In June of 2026, Elon Musk rang the opening bell on the Nasdaq and became the world's first trillionaire. The company that got him there wasn't Tesla, it was SpaceX. And the very next thing Musk did with that windfall was announce something that sounds like science fiction. He wants to take the servers running artificial intelligence, the physical machines that power everything from your chatbot to national defense systems, and launch them into orbit. Up to 1 million of them. Jeff Bezos is trying to do the same thing. So is Google. So, reportedly, is China's space program. Nobody agrees on whether this is the most obvious infrastructure move of the decade or a trillion-dollar fantasy that physics hasn't signed off on yet. And in the last 48 hours, Musk and OpenAI's Sam Altman have been publicly tearing into each other over exactly that question. This is the story of the race to move the internet off the planet, and why almost nobody outside the industry has noticed it's already underway. To understand why anyone would try something this extreme, you have to understand the problem AI companies have on Earth. They're running out of power. Training and running today's biggest AI models takes staggering amounts of electricity. Projects like OpenAI's Stargate initiative are already worth roughly $500 billion and aiming for 10 gigawatts of capacity. And even that scale is running into real-world walls. Grid connection backlogs, water usage fights with local communities, and multi-year waits just to get plugged into the power grid. Space, on paper, solves 3 of those problems at once. Solar power is available around the clock in the right orbit, with none of the weather or nighttime interruptions you get on Earth. There's no land to buy, no neighbors to fight with over water usage, and heat, normally a nightmare to manage in a server farm, can, in theory, be radiated away into the cold of space. So in January 2026, Musk's SpaceX filed paperwork with US regulators for approval to launch up to 1 million satellites, not for internet service like Starlink, but built specifically to function as an orbital data center. Weeks later, SpaceX and Musk's AI company, xAI, completed a merger, combining the rocket company that can launch hardware with the AI company that desperately needs somewhere to run it. Musk is not alone out here, and he's not even necessarily ahead. Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin has its own version called Project Sunrise, with a satellite system named TerraWave that's designed to move data between satellites at up to 6 terabits per second. Blue Origin has already filed its own plans with regulators for over 50,000 data center satellites, with deployment slated to begin in late 2027. Google has its own project called Suncatcher, built around flying satellites in extremely tight formation to cut down the communication delay between them, and it's not just American billionaires. China's national space contractor announced its own initiative in early 2026 for what it calls gigawatt-level space infrastructure, explicitly designed to support space-based data processing, putting this squarely inside the broader US-China technology competition, not just a billionaire vanity project. A small startup called StarCloud actually beat all of them into orbit. In November 2025, backed by NVIDIA, it launched a fridge-sized satellite carrying a single high-end AI chip and used it to run real AI models from space. It's a tiny proof of concept next to what Musk is proposing, but it's the first real evidence any of this can work at all. So this isn't one eccentric announcement. It's the opening moves of a genuine race between companies and increasingly between countries over who controls compute that isn't just off the grid. It's off the planet. Here's where it gets contentious, because plenty of serious people think this doesn't add up, at least not on the timeline Musk is selling. In March 2026, at an event in Austin, Musk laid out more of the plan, a project called Terafab, built with Tesla and Intel, aiming to produce 1 terawatt of processors a year. A figure he said is 50 times the combined output of every advanced chipmaker on Earth today. He gave no firm schedule for actually building it. Just this week, the tension boiled over publicly. Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI and is effectively Musk's biggest rival in the AI race, accused Musk of selling investors a vision of orbital compute that may not be practical. Musk fired back that SpaceX would, in his words, quote, start flying them next year. Short seller Jim Chanos was blunter still, pointing out that SpaceX's own Starship rocket, the vehicle this entire plan depends on, still hasn't completed a test flight that reaches full Earth orbit. And the physics questions are real, not just financial ones. Cooling is the big one. On Earth, data centers dump heat into air or water. In the vacuum of space, the only way to get rid of heat is to radiate it away, which requires enormous radiator surfaces, a problem nobody has solved at this scale. Launch costs are another. Getting a kilogram into orbit costs roughly $1,000 today, and independent estimates suggest that number needs to fall by at least 5 times before orbital data centers make basic economic sense. Musk's answer to all of this is essentially, the trend lines favor space. Launch costs keep falling. Terrestrial power keeps getting more expensive and harder to permit. Give it 2 to 3 years, he says, and the math flips in orbit's favor. Whether that's a serious engineering argument or a pitch deck line is exactly what nobody can prove yet. The next real test isn't a press conference, it's Starship itself. SpaceX's next test flights are meant to deploy a new generation of satellites and prove out the laser communication links these orbital data centers would depend on to talk to each other and to the ground. If Starship keeps missing its own orbital milestones, the flying next year promise gets harder to defend. Meanwhile, Blue Origin's competing constellation isn't due to start deploying until late 2027, which means for the next year or two, this is a story with no clear winner. Just competing claims, competing filings, and competing skeptics. And underneath the billionaire rivalry is a quieter, bigger question. If compute infrastructure moves into orbit, who actually regulates it? Right now, there's no clear international framework for policing 1 million commercial satellites running AI workloads, which is exactly the kind of governance gap that tends to get exploited long before it gets fixed. Every era has a resource everyone suddenly needs more of than the planet can easily give. Right now, that resource is compute, and for the first time, the people who control the most of it are seriously trying to leave Earth to get more. Whether that happens in 2 years or never, the fact that trillion-dollar companies are betting real money on it tells you something about how tight the walls around AI's growth have already gotten down here. This is the kind of story that's going to keep changing every few months, and I'll be tracking it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.